Good morning, it's October 25th. This is To My Liberal Friends, and if you enjoy the podcast, please hit the subscribe button. So where does the population of the United States stand politically? Are we on the left or on the right? Are we conservative or liberal? For years, the answer was most would be that we're somewhere in the middle, and I've always accepted that response. Now, there's no doubt that we're a politically polarized nation. If you look at any map that's colored by voting patterns, you'll see blue silos in urban areas and red in both suburban and rural areas. I understand that those in cities like government to be large to try and make their lives more manageable. There's more poverty in urban areas, and these people depend on government assistance to eke out a living. As you move away from these urban areas, people become less dependent on government and increasingly want to be left alone and be responsible for their own lives. Hence the divide. When Barack Obama became the president, he promised to rule from the center, but in reality he moved the nation to the left with his programs. The Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, was a massive step in the direction of what most liberals and progressives long desired, a single-payer national health care system. Democratic politicians took up this crusade and started advocating for numerous progressive causes. They called for expanded immigration, the aforementioned national health insurance, some call it Medicare for all, more welfare programs like expanding food stamp and the SNAP program, supported a revival of strong unions, and tried to force union requirements on federal and state building projects. In the energy sector, they embraced what was called the New Green Deal and promised to end the practice of fracking and halt new oil and gas leases on federal land. Joe Biden all but declared war on the fossil fuel industry. They criticized the nation's law enforcement and referred to it as a racial program that disproportionately incarcerated men of color. In some states, they began to call for some form of reparations to African Americans as payment for the abhorrent practice of slavery, and said it was justified now because of generations of discrimination. But the mood of the public seems to be shifting. Democrats are finding out that some of these policies they push so strongly are being met with resistance by the constituents they profess to serve. Let's look at some of those policies or issues where it's caused repercussions to their voting blocs. Loosening restrictions on illegal immigration was a terrible idea and voters hate it. When Joe Biden came into office, he immediately issued a series of executive orders dramatically loosening the rules for handling illegal immigrants. This was rapturously applauded by progressives as exactly what was called for. Would-be migrants, as well as the Mexican cartels that run the transit networks, heard a clear message. Entering the United States had become easier. The number of people attempting to do so spiked almost immediately. The predictable result of this dramatic surge in illegal immigration and diffusion of these immigrants to overburdened cities all over the country was a spike in both the salience of the issue and of negative sentiment toward Biden and the Democrats for letting the situation get out of control. In the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd, Democrats began to berate law enforcement. Calls to defund the police were everywhere. It worked for a while, but over time, as crime increased, particularly those urban areas, people began to see the folly in this and started to demand better law enforcement. They wanted the police in their neighborhoods. At the same time, Democrats became associated with a wave of progressive public prosecutors who seemed quite hesitant about keeping criminals off the street, even as a spike in violent crimes like murders and carjacking swept the nation. It was twinned to a climate of tolerance and non-prosecution for lesser crimes that degraded the quality of life in many cities under Democratic control. San Francisco became practically a poster child for the latter problem under DA Chase Bowden's leadership. These sentiments in pro-democratic, non-white working-class urban areas should not be puzzling. These voters tend to live in areas where they have more crime and therefore unlikely to look kindly on any approach that threatens public safety. A Pew poll found that Black and Hispanic Democrats, who are far more urban and working class, are significantly more likely than white Democrats to favor more police funding in their area. Surprise, Democrats. Joe Biden, more than any other president, embraced the idea of identity politics. People were put into categories of being either oppressed or being an oppressor. The color of your skin became the deciding factor in the eyes of many progressives. This approach is an obvious contradiction to logic and common sense, but has led much of the Democratic Party to take positions that have little purchase in social and political reality and are offensive to the basic values most Americans hold. I've repeatedly said that Joe Biden did a great service to Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Jackson Brown. He boldly announced that he would appoint a black woman to the court. I may not agree with Justice Brown's decisions, but she was qualified as a jurist to be on the court. But the fact that Biden said he would only appoint a black woman put an asterisk by her name. Why not put out a list of 10 qualified jurists include her on the list, and simply pick her from a list that also included white males. Bad ideas and arguments are bad ideas and arguments to most voters. It doesn't matter who makes them. Voters generally embrace instead the universalistic principles that are embedded in traditional American values. They believe that racial preferences in rewards and decision-making are not fair, and fairness is a fundamental part of their world outlook. They believe, with Martin Luther King, that people should, quote, not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character, end quote. But under Biden, the government engaged in an unpopular diversity, equity, inclusion program that forced many universities and private sectors to embrace the policy. It got so bad that in DEI training sessions, the DEI coordinator declared that practically every desirable work characteristic, from punctuality to hard work to individualism, is part of a white culture. I have no idea where they would get this. Now companies are abandoning these policies, and liberals are angry that they're being dismantled. The final progressive move was attacking fossil fuels and trying to force the public to adopt electric vehicles. Now, I'm all for continued research and development of EVs, but let the market dictate their sales. Car companies are losing money on each EV they produce and sell, and without the tax rebates, the sales would be even worse. I could go on for a long time about this issue, but I think the points I'm making is that the average American has turned on this progressive agenda, and the country as a whole is moving to the right. They may not all be conservatives, but they're definitely turning their back on the progressive left agenda, and a lot of those ultra-liberal politicians are seeing the change and singing a different tune in their re-election campaigns. We have definitely moved back toward the middle as a nation. This has been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening, and again, hit the subscribe button if you enjoy the podcast.